That's a big ask.
It's a big ass. Victor to the rescue. Hi, Paul. Great to see you. I heard you've been in touch with my friend. Okay, let me just put this on gallery here.
Okay. There you go.
Okay, great to see everybody. Hi, good morning, Elliot. Good morning to people in the room on Zoom. How is it? How are all of you? I guess you can't tell me. If you're nodding your head, going like this, I'm assuming you're okay. And if you're not okay, don't do that. That's all right. You can go like this. You're not so good. Tell the truth. Okay, we're going to deal with some heavy stuff today because today is Shabbat Zachor. Shabbat Zachor is the Shabbat of remembrance of Amalek. So it's a mitzvah, it's a commandment to remember Amalek. And we'll investigate what that means. So, Gil, I forgot one thing. So can you screen share the blessing and can someone do the blessing and I'll be right back.
Sure.
Time to take my coat off.
Anyone volunteers to read the blessing?
Appreciate it.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshana b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen. 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 Okay. Just forgot my trusty little timers. Minute and 30-second glasses. And this is a beautiful gift from Gail Linewall, who's been just, wanted to help me structure this hour. So thank you, Gail, for that beautiful gift. Okay, so Amalek. Wow. So Amalek is how the Torah imagines ultimate evil, right? Amalek, both in terms of a real people that the Israelites were fighting, and also just, there's so much about the memory of Amalek, which we'll look at in a minute. And my question for today is, what are the limits of understanding evil? Is it okay to understand evil? What are the dangers of understanding evil? So those are some of my questions, and you'll see that the texts go in two directions. One is evil occurs when the victim does something. So we know what the danger of that is. It's blaming the victim, right? Like what happens that evil occurs? That's number one. Number two, the other danger is the tradition has a beautiful text that Rabbi David actually mentioned last night in his sermon to show like what happened to the ancestor of Amalek that Amalek turned out the way Amalek turned. Why is Amalek the evil that? Why is Amalek the evil that Amalek is, and why does Amalek do the evil that Amalek does? And the Talmud gives a reason. Right, so what are the dangers of considering that reason? Do we want to understand and have compassion for people who do evil? Okay, so those are my questions, and I'm going to share my screen. Okay, Shabbat Zachor. Okay, can everyone see it? Great. So this first piece is from Deuteronomy. It's the parsha that we will read today. It's source number 1. Good morning. And there's so much in here that we can spend a whole hour on this, but we won't. And I will read it. Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek baderech b'seitchem miMitzrayim. So remember, already, right, it's, framed, the whole question of Amalek is framed in terms of memory. Remember what Amalek did to you on your journey after you left Egypt, right? And it's framed at a specific moment in time, right? A historical moment. We'll look at what happened in a minute. We'll look at that narrative. As soon as the Israelites left, almost as soon as the Israelites left Egypt, they were attacked by Amalek. Asher karcha, verse 18, Baderech, Yizanev b'cha kol hanecheshalim acharecha, v'ata ayef, v'yagea, v'lo yarei Elohim. So, Asher karcha baderech is already interesting. They happened upon you on your way, right? There's some sense of, they happened, right? There's some sense of potential randomness here, but you'll see the next phrase kind of counteracts that randomness because they happened upon you when you were famished and weary and cut down all the stragglers in your rear. So when I was talking to my chavruta this morning, Rabbi Sharon Cohen-Anisfeld, we were talking about why were the stragglers in the rear? What was going on in the community that the Israelites left those who were most tired and weary in the back, right? So it reminds me of a moment during COVID when a lot of Black Lives Matters protests were happening. I was participating in a lot of bicycle, we were taking bike rides and protesting Black Lives Matter, right? We were, there was like huge sort of troops of bicyclists like going throughout the city. And I was about 20 to 40 years older than most people, on the protest. And sometimes I'd be at the very back. And there's always someone assigned to check in on the people in the back and to make sure that the people in the front didn't go too far ahead. And there was something that felt to me almost redemptive about that. Like I was a little embarrassed. It was really beautiful. Like here I am, the vulnerable one, and they're taking care of me. And the other thing they did on those protests is when anyone was hurt, the entire group would stop and say, medic, medic, and no one would move until that person had been treated in some way. Right, so it's almost like the repair of what we're protesting, we were modeling, if that makes sense. There was something redemptive about it. So here, did the Israelites leave, the people who are weak or older or wounded or whatever at the back? And if you do, then, something can happen to them if you're not protecting them. Okay. I'm not taking comments yet. You can raise your hands if you want, but we're not up to that yet. Okay. And this is an interesting word, necheshalim. So you almost expect to see chalash, the weak ones, but what it really says is necheshalim, and it has to do, and maybe Jeremy and I talk a lot about this, Hebrew words, can help me with this one, or anyone else. It has to do with being hammered, hammering. So the person who is in the passive, necheshal, is someone who's been crushed.
Agree.
Yeah?
Agree.
Yeah, you agree?
Yeah.
Okay.
Flailing, being
Flailing, crushed.
Yep.
Okay, good, thank you. Okay, so now, 19. והיה בהניח אדוני אלוהיך לך מכל אויביך מסביב בארץ אשר אדוני אלוהיך נותן לך נחלה לירשתה, תמחה את זכר עמלק מתחת השמיים, לא תשכח. So when God, your God,
Yes.
grants you safety from all your enemies around you. So note where the mitzvah is sort of grounded, right? When you feel safe, right? In the land that the Lord your God is giving you for a hereditary portion, that's like when you feel safe, when you're in the land that God gave you, when you're sort of firmly rooted in your land and your enemies are no longer attacking you, you're no longer a victim. That's when you're commanded to timcheh, erase et zecher Amalek, right? To erase the memory of Amalek, mitachat hashamayim, from below the heavens, and then it says lo tishkach, don't forget. So there's something really contradictory here, right? So you should erase the memory, don't forget. What does that mean?
Don't forget to erase the memory.
Don't forget to erase the memory. Okay, All right. But if you don't forget to erase the memory, then you're not erasing the memory, because you're remembering to erase the memory, which means you're remembering the memory, right? So it's a contradictory, maybe paradoxical kind of command. Okay, so I want to investigate for a moment the contradictory nature of the effect of evil. So Judith Herman, who wrote, a pivotal book, the late 90s, trauma and recovery, almost, starting the whole field of trauma studies, writes, the conflict between the will to deny horrible events and the will to proclaim them aloud is the central dialectic of psychological trauma. Do you want to know? Do you want to not know? Do you want to know the evil? Do you want to not know the evil? People who have survived atrocities often tell their stories in a highly emotional, contradictory, and fragmented manner that undermines their credibility and thereby serves the twin imperatives of truth-telling and secrecy. When the truth is finally recognized, survivors can begin their recovery, but far too often secrecy prevails, and the story of the traumatic event surfaces not as a verbal narrative, but as a symptom. So she's pointing, first of all, to the difficulty of sort of truth-telling around evil, or having been subject to evil. That's number one. And that the truth-telling comes out in sort of almost a contradictory sort of form, because, how do you get words around, having been the victim of evil? And number three, she says that only when the truth is finally recognized that survivors can begin their recovery. So this feels to me very much of a mirror of Deuteronomy in the sense of, do you blot out their memory? Do you remember? When can you remember? When can you recognize the truth, right? And the paradoxical nature of that whole enterprise. Okay.
It's also, it just feels also, can I say just also
Yeah.
that there's an implicit promise not to tell the story, and for those who suffer, especially domestic abuse. This is in the context of, in domestic context and in the family system, often the disbelief is the betrayal of the trust, right? And so one feels like where she says there's a chiyuv, there's an obligation here to keep it secret. And so those two levers, the gas pedal and the brake, working against
kind of
each
loyalty
other.
to the
The loyalty and the secrets, exactly. Like the secrets, that's what she's essentially highlighting, is that the twin imperatives, both from the imperative of the healthy instinct to tell the truth, right, is met with the break of, I have to keep this a secret. And then that, she says, that produces this the symptom instead of the actual story, which is amazing. Just to
so
think.
if you can't tell the story, then your body tells the story.
And your body tells the story, or tells the score.
Right.
And so it's really remarkable that when in the other trauma of the Jewish people, which is Passover, the principal mitzvah of Passover is to tell the story.
Yeah.
Over and over again, tell the story, because it's as if we're practicing, against the secret. We're not supposed to say.
Right. But it's not only in families that our secrets are kept. I was actually, again, I'm going to reference my conversation with Jeremy recently. So I saw this amazing film called The Summer of Avia, which is set in Israel shortly after the state of Israel was created. And in it, a Holocaust survivor is taunted for being a survivor. Right? The story of the Holocaust could not emerge in the state of Israel for a few decades, right? I don't remember exactly when it started sort of to emerge in its fullness. Maybe someone else knows. But that story was suppressed, right? And that wasn't about loyalty. That was about something else, right? Perhaps the weakness, like not wanting to know the vulnerability of the Jew in Jewish history, which has been a real tension in.
Or the desire to move forward from it. I don't know if you've ever experienced this.
Which is right. In order to survive, we can't even hear the story. Okay, so I see. Let me just see any other hands besides Beth. Okay, so Beth, you see another hand? Roberta, okay. Okay, remember, everyone has up to a minute. So remember to be concise. You can say a lot in a minute. Okay, here we go. It's a kind of challenge.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat
I
shalom.
feel obligated to comment on animal behavior. Um, in the story of Amalek,
Yeah,
both the Amalekites and the Proto-Israelites are engaging in animalistic behavior. The fact that the Israelites are leaving stragglers behind,
yeah,
something that happens in a herd,
yeah.
the fact that prey animals pick off the stragglers as a means of feeding
Okay,
themselves.
hold on a second, Beth. The sound is really weird. Is that us or is that,
Yeah, it looks like a Wi-Fi issue, actually.
it's a Wi-Fi issue?
I mean, if it's breaking up like that.
That's not good. Okay. Sorry. Okay, sorry, Beth. Okay, continue. I'll give you some extra time. Go ahead, Beth.
So both groups are behaving animalistically because predators will pick off the weak stragglers and herds will leave. The example you gave, Diane, about the group you were marching with, how they kept up with the stragglers is a really beautiful thing. And it has occurred in animals as well. There are some examples that have been reported of bison who will go back to the back and protect a straggler who's being attacked by mountain lions and successfully ward off the mountain lions and keep the straggler living. So I think what the warning here is not just don't act like Amalek, but also don't act like those proto-Israelites leaving the stragglers behind. Depart.
Samati. Okay. Roberta. Roberta Wall,
Got it.
yeah.
I also love the opening question you asked about evil. We're not, so hopefully we get to that. It occurred to me that this exhortation, do not forget, is the reminder that, I think of Amalek as doubt. My understanding of that, I think we've heard that a lot in our group, and that that it's a moment-to-moment practice. It's a daily practice. It's a continual practice to remember that doubt arises, that doubt that we are all one, and we see it. We go, we start the day with like the best intentions of loving everyone, caring for, like what you shared in your talk last night, David. Why can't we care as much about the Palestinian deaths as the Jewish deaths, and the Jewish deaths as, we start with these intentions and then we forget. We go through the day and we forget that we actually all are one, that we actually do come from the same source, so that this do not forget is the reminder to practice moment to moment to moment.
All right, thank you,
And
Roberta.
I'm so happy to have this insight. I've puzzled over this for so long.
I'm sticking to my time limits. I need a
Yes,
little.
I'm finished. Thank
really
you.
sorry, Roberta.
Debarty.
Shamati. So you're taking it to doubt, which is an interesting place to take it, because what we're talking about here is this, at least so far, we're talking about in real terms of people who are evil in the world and who are attacking. And you're taking it to a place of consciousness and spirituality, which we're going to get to. But I wonder, you referenced the fact that I brought up the issue of the dangers of understanding evil. I'm resistant locating the responsibility for evil only in ourselves. Like, I hear what you want to do, Roberta, and I think it's really crucial. And I want to also keep alive the fact of real evil in the world and its effects, if that makes sense. Okay, Okay. Jay, Nishama, and Jeremy, if you had your hand up, I'd like to hear from you.
Yeah, I've always been puzzled by the paradox, and now the text gives me another question about it, which is when, how, can we reach the moment when we actually can forget? Because that's in fact the instruction that we do not forget to block the memory at some point. How and when will we reach that point, and what does that mean?
So when you say we, do you mean an individual that has suffered trauma or a collective?
No, it's in our text, right? So it's our
I see
text.
what you're saying.
So when will we, Jews, humans, etc.,
I see.
reach
So
that?
the text specifically says when you're in your land and you have respite from your enemies all around you. Does that ever happen?
Exactly.
Perhaps is what you're wondering. So then,
Yes.
yes.
What is our role in not making it happen?
Yeah. And not making that happen. Yeah, I'm gonna let that question stand. I don't have an answer for that, but that's a big one. Okay, Nishama.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, this addresses a question that's been right on my mind right now, trauma and evil and all of that, which has to do with the abuse of children. And I'm not even talking about sexual abuse at the moment. I'm talking about that it's okay to hit your child because they've distressed you, or a way of keeping order, or a way of punishment, or a way of having them do what they are, quote unquote, supposed to do. So the fact is that this is worldwide in many ways. And the idea of physically harming a helpless being, and that's okay, in schools and by parents, is suddenly just very much on my mind as the beginning of all of this. Then, yes, it's not a matter of picking up the stragglers because you're hungry, but just to even allow such a thing in oneself, because one is aggravated.
Yeah, Nishama, just wrap it up, please. Yeah.
I'm wrapping it up. That's all I want to say. It's like the big thing to me.
Yeah. And I think the through line here, I think the through line, and thank you for bringing that up, and of course that's a big, a huge theme at Romemu and Shabbat of the Child, and we're going to be devoting, programs to this later in the year. But I think the through line here is the innocence and the vulnerability, right? The stragglers in the rear, right? The ones who are weary and tired and vulnerable. And children, of course, are more vulnerable than anybody, right? So I don't think there was a question in what you were asking. I think you just wanted to raise that and put that in the room. Yeah.
For me, it's the beginning of all of the allowing that people allow within themselves to forget, to not take care of the weak. All of that starts with being helpless as a child and being actually physically hurt.
Thank you, Shama. Jeremy, did you want to say?
Yeah, I'll say so really quickly. Yeah. There's a big difference between the English translation and the Hebrew. The Hebrew ends with Ata ayefe yageh velo yareh Elohim. You were not in awe of God. That's the last thing, that's the strongest thing. In English, it's kind of snuck in at the beginning. I think we're being told not to forget the fact that we lost faith at the time. And if we don't forget that, we'll have a lot more power to deal with bad things that happen going forward.
Yeah, and we're going to get into exactly that question of faith in the text in one moment. Thank you, Jeremy. That's exactly where we're going. Oh my God, I see. Okay, Rabbi Ingber, and then 2 quick questions here or comments, and we're going on.
So I think another feature of trauma, especially when we're speaking about, Neshama brought up the trauma with children, is that there's a tendency within children to, for all kinds of important reasons, to assume that if they're being mistreated, that it's their fault. And this is like a very important survival mechanism for children who don't understand why, innately, a family system should be like supporting them and loving them, and they can't bear the thought, right, that the parent or the parental figure is weak in any way because they need the parent to be strong for their own survival. So of course, they have agency by blaming themselves. And this impulse is also a powerful impulse in Jewish history and in Jewish theology, and it's also an impulse in this conversation, which is like, here we are looking at the Or text around about a group that attacked us when we were vulnerable. And our first impulse is to, first of all, wonder aloud why we didn't protect the vulnerable. That's the first impulse. And not to say like there are Amalek-like people whose evil has its origins in ignorance and in child rearing and in other, not innately evil as maybe some Jews throughout history thought, like they're born that way. No one is born like an Amalekite, although the text seems to imply that. But like here we are sitting on the Upper West Side, right, where we're for the most part we can pass as non-Jews as long as we're not wearing yarmulkes externally and other religious trappings. And maybe 5 miles away in Brooklyn, our brothers and sisters who walk around the streets looking as Jewish as my great-grandparents did are being attacked at a rate that we haven't seen in decades, let alone in our lifetime. And and we're wondering, right, what's our responsibility? Like an abused child that asks, what did I do? Like, what did I do?
So I think
I just think like it's like, how do we hold?
Yeah, no, I think that's
we have to hold the place
right.
that on this Shabbat, a Parshat Zachor, like there's more anti-Semitism in the world than there was last year and the year before and the year before, and its roots are very complicated. But like certainly the impulse to say that it's what can we do is both, I think, a powerful impulse and an important one because it gives us agency to change things, but also recognizing that no matter what we've done throughout history, it seems to find us no matter where we are.
Absolutely, and I think you missed my opening when I said, when we look at the reasons or we try to understand evil, there's the danger of blaming the victim.
Right.
Blaming the victim. And that's it. And the child who blames themselves, this goes back to your question of loyalty, right? Like we blame ourselves so somehow to maintain the relationship and also to kind of, we think we can control the world that way. But somehow if it was our fault,
right,
then we can make it okay. Mm-hmm. But I want to say, categorically that evil is evil, and there's nothing to excuse it. And yet, I think there's something valuable to some of these texts helping us understand how we might at least protect ourselves against evil. So when we ask questions about the nature of the community, we ask how can we best strengthen ourselves so we're less vulnerable to evil? I think that's a very legitimate question to ask. Oh my God. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh my God. All right. So wait, I said that two people who had their hands up were ready to talk, and that's all. I think it was Joe and Elliot. Was that right?
It was.
Okay, Joe and Elliot, and we'll go on with the text, and people who have their hands up after that?
Next round.
Next round. Thank you.
I'm deferring.
You sure, Joe?
Yes, just move forward.
Elliot.
Yeah, so it's really a question. So the word, therefore, in the translation is very interesting to me. And I wonder whether, Jeremy or...
There's no therefore there. Right.
There's no, in the Hebrew...
Therefore, there's no therefore.
There's no...
V'haya. V'haniach Adonai. And it will be when God gives you respite from all your enemies. God, your Lord.
So there's no
therefore.
It's just
and it will be.
And it will be.
It's the conversive verb trying to get into the future.
Yeah.
Okay, it will be.
It will be. It will be when. It will be when.
Okay.
Okay, does that help?
It does help, but so given that, I just also, another question about the translation. So it's translated as "you shall blot out," okay, which reads as a command, but I'm wondering whether in the Hebrew it reads as a command. Yes.
It could also be you will.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. It could also be, this is what will happen. But then it says lo tishcha, right? Then do not forget. That's pretty clearly like
the force of it is
commanding.
definitely command language.
And I will say one more thing that I forgot to point out before, that there's, the evil happens upon you, Amalek happens upon you, but here in verse 19, we are asked to be supremely active, right? To blot out, or we will be active, to blot out and to remember.
Yeah, so given that, okay, that it could be you will, not as a command, but basically this is what's gonna happen, I wonder whether the do not forget, okay, can be read as, do not forget that this will happen. Basically, have faith that this will happen.
Ah, beautiful, a beautiful reading. And, okay, so now we're going to faith, which both Jeremy and Elliot are sort of pointing us to. So I'm gonna share my screen, Batya, I'm sorry, we're gonna have to, you're gonna be in the next round. Okay, this is, I read this again this morning with my chavrutas. Such a beautiful passage. So this is Exodus 17. And in terms of the narrative here, remember that the Israelites really just left Egypt. They complained about water, they complained about food, they were given Shabbat, and now this happens. Okay? Rabbi Ingber, do you feel like reading?
Sure.
Okay. Source 3.
Vayikra Hashem hamakom masa umiriva al bid bnei Yisrael ve'al nasotam et Adonai lemor hayesh Adonai b'kirvenu im ayin. Also in English, we'll go back and forth here.
Yeah, go back and forth.
The place was named Massa and Meribah because the Israelites quarreled and because they tried the Lord, saying, "Is Havayah present among us or not?"
So let me just say one thing about this, or two things. One is, there's two contexts here. One is God here? Do we feel God? Where's God, right? So that potential loss of faith. And my chavruta pointed this out this morning, Sharon pointed this out, that there's a Riv B'nai Israel, there's a quarrel perhaps within B'nai Israel, so perhaps again, the fabric of the community has been frayed. Right, so what's the connection? Even though I want to acknowledge that naming the dangers, or I want to name the danger of making a connection between what Israel does and when the evil moves in, and yet the text is pointing us to that connection between faith and the occurrence of Amalek, and between the fabric of community and the occurrence of Amalek. Right, this is happening for this second time. Okay, go ahead.
Vayavo Amalek vayilachem im Yisrael b'Refidim, and Amalek came and fought with Israel at a place called Refidim. Vayomer Moshe el Yoshua, Moshe said to Yoshua, "Bechar lanu anashim, choose for us people, men, v'tzei yilachem Amalek, and go out and fight with Amalek. Machar, tomorrow, Anochi nitzav al rosh hagivah, I will be standing firmly on the top of Mount Givah, on the hill of Givah, or on the hill on top of the Givah, which is a hill. Umatei Elohim b'yadi, and I'll have the God stick with me in my hand."
The God stick, I love that.
Right. Vayas Yoshua kasher amar lo Moshe, and Yoshua did as Moshe had told him to do, lilachem b'Amalek, to fight with Amalek. Moshe Aaron v'Chur, and Moses took Aaron and Chur, alu Rosh Hakeva, they went to the top of the hill.
So let's just say who Chur is, we don't really know, but the Midrash says that Chur is the son of Miriam who married Caleb, right? Who's another one of Moshe's sort of interns, so to speak. So it's all in the Moshe family here.
Verse 11, Vayah, and it was, Kasher Yarim Moshe Yado v'Gavar Yisrael. When Moshe would lift his hand, Israel would prevail, would be strengthened. V'Kasher Yaniach Yado, but when his hand would go down, or we rest his hand, Gavar Amalek, then Amalek would prevail. V'dei Moshe Kvedim, and so because of that, when Moshe's hands were very heavy, Vayichu Evin v'Asimu Tachtav v'Yesher Alav, and so they put a stone beneath Moshe, and he sat on it. The Aaron the Chur tamchu b'yadav, and Aaron and Chur were the ones who held up his hands. Mizeh echad, from this side one, and from this side another. V'yadav emunah advo hashamesh, and his hands were emunah, which means here they were supported or steady, to be like consistent. And meaning they didn't fluctuate, they didn't go up and down until the sun came, until the sun arrived, until the sun set. Amazing, these are amazing. And that and then Yoshua, now the word Vaychalosh, also Nechashalim, is also very intense. Verse 13, and Yoshua overwhelmed or made the Amalekites weak. with the sword.
So wait, let's just go over like verse 12 and 13 because it's really powerful. So when Moshe's weak, he has this support, right? It's so beautiful on this side and on this side. Right? So there's something about strengthening the weak that helps to fight Amalek. And it's not magic because then Yoshua has to go fight Amalek with the sword. You kind of wish that it was enough to hold the hands up. It's not enough to hold the hands up and support the hands, support Moshe. There's war, right? Okay.
Verse 14, Vayomer Yadonai el Moshe, and now God says to Moshe, Kitov zot zikaron b'sefer, write this as a memorial in the book, or as a reminder. V'sim b'oznei Yoshua, and place it in the ears of Joshua. Ki macho encha et zecher Amalek, God says, I will utterly blot out the name of, the memory of Amalek, mitachat hashamayim, from beneath the heavens.
So that's different, that here God's doing it, and in Deuteronomy, we're going to do it. It's very different. So there's some interesting development between Exodus and Deuteronomy in terms of human agency.
Then Moshe Mizbeach, and now Moshe in verse 15 builds an altar. Vayikra Shmo Adonai Nisi, and he called the name of the altar Adonai Nisi, which means God lifts me up, or God is my banner, or God is my miracle, or God tried me. Vayomer ki yad al kes yah, and he said, this is so cryptic, there will be a hand on the kes yah, on the throne or the seat. Speaking of seats, we just had a whole scene with a seat, and now we're back with God's seat. There's a hand on the seat of Yah. Milchama ladunai ba'amalek. There is a war of God with Amalek, midor dor, in every generation throughout time.
So here again, Amalek is expressed, or relationship to Amalek is expressed in terms of forgetting and erasure, right? But we don't have the human agency here. But what we do have is case Yah, right? This really, as Rabbi David was just saying, cryptic expression of what's this throne of God. Now, the word Yah, the name of God, is this is the only place where God in the 5 books of Moses is referred to as Yah. It's a common name in the book of Psalms, but not in the 5 books of Moses. So that's interesting. And case, which means seat, is missing an aleph. So let's look at the midrash on that. So Psik to Rav Kahana, Rabbi Levi, B'Shem Rabbi Huna, Bar Chanina, I guess Amar, Kozman, Shezra'o Shel Amalek Kiyem Ba'olam, Lo Hashem Shalem. So every time, as long as the seed of Amalek exists in the world, the name of the Lord is not complete. V'lo hakisei shalem, and the throne of the Lord is not complete. Right? So there's something about the presence of Amalek, the presence of archetypal evil in the world, that actually interferes with the nature of God. Like, that's a very intense and radical statement. Okay. Avad zra'o shel Amalek min ha'olam, Hashem shalem v'hakisei shalem. So, but when, the seed of Amalek is gone or eliminated, then God will be whole and the throne will be whole. The only problem is, Vayomer ki yad al kes yah milchama l'Adonai, Amalek means door, right? The Lord will be at war with Amalek throughout the ages, every generation, right? It's like the Passover Seder. Every generation we're going to face this. And here we are. I'm sure each of us has different examples of that trauma and children abuse, and we can name a million things happening in the world where the vulnerable and the innocent are, destroyed, not taken care of, tortured. I mean, it's a never-ending list, right? It's not over. It's never going to be over. This is what we have to live with. So in that sense, we live with a truncated God. What does that mean? Okay, so there were hands from before. I'm going to stop my share. Okay, I see a lot of hands
Diane, I just
now.
wanted to see the ending out piece. Did you want to? Yeah. I feel like you want to.
The Rashi?
Yeah, I felt like we need
Yeah,
to underscore.
actually,
a little-
I like that, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like before we
Let's-
open, because
yeah,
there's a lot to
yeah,
say.
Yeah.
Just
Okay,
what-
wait,
I feel like
I
you
just
had some
lost
beautiful
my,
sources here about this impulse to say that the faith, as Jeremy is.
Okay, you're right, let me do two, thank you.
Yeah, I just
It's
feel
good to have you here. Let me do two more sources, then I'm gonna open it up, thank you. So here's this gorgeous piece from Franz Rosenzweig. Somehow I remember at this moment, I should find this, loves it. This is in a letter, this is an excerpt from a letter to his sister-in-law. Franz Rosenzweig was a late 19th century, early 20th century Jewish philosopher. And can I
Sorry,
have
Rabbi,
someone?
I'm sorry to stop. We see just half of the screen. If you, something in the screen share.
Oh, right. What did I do wrong?
No, just try it again. Maybe.
Just try it again? Okay, thank you. Let's try. Thank you, Gil. Let's try it again. Ah, there it is.
Yeah.
Miracle. Okay, does someone in the room want to read this?
I will.
Great, Paul, thank you. Good.
Each of us can only seize by the scruff whoever happens to be closest to us in the mire. This is the neighbor the Bible speaks of. And the miraculous thing is that although each of us stands in the mire of ourself, we can each pull out our neighbor or at least keep him from drowning. None of us has solid ground under our feet.
I always thought it was only me, but it turns out it's everybody.
Yeah, me too.
I'm so relieved.
Each of us is only held up by the neighborly hands grasping us by the scruff, with the result that we are each held up by the next one, and often, indeed, most of the time, hold each other of us up mutually. All this mutual upholding, which is a physical impossibility, becomes possible only because the great hand from above supports all these holding human hands by their wrists. It is this, and not some non-existent solid ground under one's feet, that enables all the human hands to hold and to help. There is no such thing as standing, there is only being held up.
So first of all, this is like a stunning commentary on the text we just read, right? Just holding each other up. It seems to me like the very opposite of, picking yourself up by your own bootstraps, which I never understood what that meant. I mean, it's the very opposite. It's like that fantasy of ultimate independence as opposed to mutual interdependence, right? So,
So are you saying that in the text, that what was their hands were like their hands were not holding one another up, and that's like, at least in the rabbinic trope, that's when evil begins to prevail on some level, or in more broadly, like the forces that are always the negative force in the world, they find their way when we disconnect from one another's mutuality and we forget. Yeah, is that, yeah.
Yeah, and I was talking to someone recently who is a specialist in disaster studies. And the antidote to disaster is to have hyper-local supportive communities. It's like, are we holding each other up? Right? And it's not that we'll ever stop evil, but we can mitigate evil together. Hold on, let's do one more text. I see people's hands. Okay, we're gonna do Rashi, because Rashi here is really amazing. And this actually relates to what Roberta was saying before.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, you wanna read the Rashi?
No, which one are you doing?
We're doing source 6.
Oh, because I thought 7 also was.
We could do 6 and 7. 7 is short, go ahead.
Which one? 6 or 7?
6 and 7.
Oh, okay. So this, when Amalek comes, the reason why Amalek came, Samach Parsha Zul Mikrizel, Amar Tamir Ani Benechem, Umuzuman Lechol Tachechem, Morim Mayesh Adonai B'Kibrekein, B'Im Ayin. Says, the reason why the Parsha, as Rabbi Kolar has said, the reason why Amalek comes in, and the immediately preceding paragraph is all about them asking, is God in our midst, right? God says, I'm always here, ready to meet your needs, and you're asking, like rhetorically, is God in our midst or not? Chayechem, God, and this image is like a bit punitive. Chayechem, by your life, shakele bavenoshechetchem. Like I'm gonna bring a dog to come and bite you. And then you'll cry out to me, and then you'll know where I am.
Right? It's such a parental kind of thing.
It's like a parable. Mashallah, Adam This is like the footsteps poem. Like the parable of the person who put his son on his shoulders and went out on the way. Right? Like the child says, God, Dad, give me that object, and he gives it to him, and then he says another second thing, and the third thing.
Give me this, give me that, buy me candy.
Right. He says, Abba, and they come to a guy, and a scary guy, let's say, and he says, have you seen my father? And Amar lo Aviv, how could you not know where I am? You're riding on my shoulders. And here in this image, the father throws the son down, and a dog comes and bites him, and that's the parable for what happens here in the Amalek story. Is that Amalek only came because we asked where is God in our midst or not? But the antidote, in source 7, is that Moshe's hands were steadfast and faithful. Moshe yadav be'emunah, prusot hashamayim b'tfilah ne'emana u'nechona. Rashi says that his hands were spread out in faithfulness, in confidence, and in firm prayer, which is like that's the antidote to be faithful to one another.
So that's a huge question. Like, how is faith operating here, and how is faith an antidote to evil, and is faith an antidote to evil, and on what level? So it feels like we're talking on different levels, right? We're talking on the level of real evil in the universe. Bacha, I'm going to get to in 1 second.
Okay.
1 second.
Okay.
Real evil in the universe. And then we're also talking on the level of consciousness, and that there's something about faith that's protective on some level, but we have to be really careful, because no matter how much innocent faith a child has, there's often no protection, or an adult, right? So it's so ever complicated, and it's kind of a minefield. Okay, Batya, who's been waiting so impatiently.
Nothing monumental, but I began to think about every night, except for Shabbat, I must forgive anything that anyone has done to me, or to make me upset, or in this incarnation or any other, which I love. Right in my Siddur it says that. So I think that this is a big, and I'm never going to be able to, I'm not going to have power to do anything against the gigantic evil that takes place with people like Hitler. His name should be erased.
Should be erased.
And all evil that's going on today. But I can really think about every morning when I say, keep me away from the evil inclination. I think that's the big.
So this goes back also to Roberta's comment.
Issue.
So can we work with the evil inclination in ourselves?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Okay.
I think so.
All right.
I mean,
thank you, Batya.
we can.
So we're kind of like skipping from landscape to landscape here. Like, do we want to sort of explore and ask questions about the evil outside in the universe, or the evil within, which will take us to, hopefully we'll get there, to the Sfat Emet, right? To the evil inclination. Okay, Wendy.
I think the reason that this fight with Amalek is the most hurtful, because Amalek is mishpacha. Amalek is family. Amalek is a descendant of Esau. And so coming down, it is the continuing battle between Jacob and Esau. Never ends, never ends. And I think also is the reason why it hurts so much, because it's, what they have in common is Isaac, both of them. And I think that's what hurts so much. And then going forward, the Israelites do the same thing to the tribe of Midian, who is also family, you know, on two levels. And then, of course, this week being Purim, Haman is considered to be a descendant of Amalek. So we're constantly fighting. The fight between Jacob and Esau never ends.
So it's taken
Never ends.
a collective form, and we'll see that the Talmud says that that Amalek is born from Timnah, who wanted to convert, but who was rejected by our forefathers. Right? So that it's that kind of evil implied by that specific text is born of rejection. Okay, Sarah.
Thank you. I want to follow what Wendy said.
Yeah.
And because one of the things that I think that what she said, it makes absolutely clear is that trauma can be transmitted intergenerationally if it's not healed. And so I go back to the beginning, the first section that we looked at here, and I'm wondering if the command to forget and not to forget is when you are a people with your land, you need to heal and forget so forgetting isn't necessarily right, but you need to heal, and so you don't replay the traumas. But remember that you have been a traumatized people, and do that through faith to prevent the reenactment from being.
So there's something about faith that's
as a
healing.
healing.
And I go back to Jay's question, like, when do we ever have respite from the enemies surround us? Like, when do we ever feel safe? So perhaps at some point we just have to say we're safe enough.
Yeah.
Okay, Alina, and then I'm gonna go to some people on
I'm in
the.
Bach's camp. I always try to find what I can use. And the first thing to me, I see people who walk around with fear, and I think when they're talking about to forget, it's like to not constantly be part of creating fear in our own thoughts. That's one thought. And the other is that we're upheld to think, what a great practice to thank the cab driver that took me here, to be aware that when the person gives me change, every moment. To
How
be
are we
able-
held up?
How we constantly.
How are we holding each
to
other
use
up?
that as a practice.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I love that. I also want to say, Bacha, I don't agree with you that there's nothing we can do about the evil of the world. I think that the texts are pointing us in a direction, which is to strengthen the community and to take care of the vulnerable. I think it's that's the practice. Okay.
I'm not sure if I'm in your peripheral vision or not.
Oh, you're not? Thank you for calling me. Okay, Tomas, and then we're going to Rabbi Sharon, Daniel, Rachel, and Bev. Okay.
Just very briefly, in case it can
Tomas.
be clarified.
Yeah.
These passages from Rashi 6 and 7,
yeah,
you know, at least as I understand them, they seem to be despicable, because this idea that if one faith falters, if one loses track of one's protector, that's precisely the moment when that putative protector will demonstrate his power by abandoning you.
Yes.
And that therefore faith is some kind of magical thinking force field that one has to sustain. And this seems to be a dire corruption of the absolute message of presence conveyed, for example, in the 23rd Psalm. You know, even in the valley of the shadow of death, I'm right there with you. So this just seems horrific and a really misguided
Can people on
attempt.
screen hear Tomas? I just want to make sure. Read.
Yeah.
Yes?
You know, it seems a misguided meaning making. It makes it logical. Oh, if I lose my faith, I'll be punished. Therefore, I must not lose my faith.
So this is one of the dangers that I mentioned at the beginning. Like in trying to understand evil, what dangers, what pitfalls, like what, you know, are we falling into? And this is one of them. So this is where the powerful person upon which we have faith is actually turning against us when we lose the connection. And I'll ask you, I guess I wonder, Tomas, is there any level on which this is true?
No.
No. Okay, you're clear about that.
It must not be true.
It must not be
I
true.
won't participate in a discourse in which this assertion by Rashi is true.
Okay, so you don't want to be complicit with Rashi.
It's not a question of want.
Okay, it's just simply not true. Okay, Rabbi David, you want to say something?
Yeah, I have
Yeah.
to leave, and this is so juicy now, but I just love that Tomas spoke truth in this moment, and I feel like the meaning making in our texts, often the courage to speak up and protest the text is very present for us in a liberal Jewish community. It's, you know, I grew up in an Orthodox community, and the level of protest in that community against the text itself was limited to some degree. It went to a certain place, but then it stopped. And here it's like we all feel like when we come against what Phyllis Trebel called texts of terror, in our tradition, we all feel very empowered to speak out, and I'm happy about that. And I think part of the meaning making of sometimes psycho-spiritualizing, which is often beautiful and it kind of redeems the text on some level, and we're doing that today. It also, I think that we need to be able to do that outside of the Jewish community too. So the same way that we are willing, the same impulse to say, how can I make meaning of this text and look at my own Amalek, right? We live in a world where the Christian tradition is still rampant with anti-Semitic tropes in their texts, and people are not getting up in pulpits and as much as they should be and talking about how Jews are pilloried and seen as the other. We're not speaking about how the Quran, because it's countercultural for us, because we want to build bridges with, you know, Muslim communities and with Christian communities and with Black communities. But we as Jews have a responsibility to both look inwardly and say, how can I build bridges and see the hands that are holding me up, but also call out structures and systems outside of us that continue to perpetuate tropes of anti-Semitism, period. Like, you know, so it's not enough to decry what's happening, in my personal opinion, with the settlers, if we don't also raise our voices and say, you know, the ones who continue to teach Palestinian and Muslim children that Jews are the enemy should also be called out, and we need to have that voice equally present in our liberal Jewish communities. We have that strong voice. I mean, I'm the first one, and others who said like, oh my God, I can't believe Jews are acting this way. That's absolutely true. We should be saying that. But like, we can't just sit around a table on a Shabbat of Amalek and not just say that there are systems and structures that are not, that need to be, we need to speak it out and not just go inwardly and say like, oh, I'm just gonna like, you know, this cab driver is a holy human being. That's of course what we do. We're Hasidic Jews. But like, it's too pernicious and too big for us not to hold both of those things together, in my opinion. That's all I want to say and leave, because I hate to drop that and leave, but I have to go prepare for Tila. But that's why I just wanted to piggyback on Tomas, because that was really, I love that you said that. And thank you for that. But,
Amen.
Amen. Okay. I want to honor again that we're talking about evil on so many levels, and that there's no level which should or could deny the existence of real evil in the world, right? And that evil that some of us in this room have been subject to in one way or another. Okay, Sharon. Sharon, yeah.
Shabbat Shalom. Yeah. Gulp. So this particular thread, yeah, it feels very alive and important. And I think what I wanted to say, it relates to what you're saying, Diane, and what you said before about the fact that we're talking on so many different planes at once. And I guess what I wanted to say is I feel that the sources that you're bringing, the text itself, the Torah itself, kind of demands that we do that. In other words, you know, I'm not sure that it's meaningful to say the evil out there is something completely other and a whole different plane from the Yetzer Hara in us. You know, for me, it's part of what's so challenging is it's not collapsing or ignoring or avoiding the evil out there, but it's also not completely othering it, not seeing it as completely separate from what operates in us. And so, you know, I feel the text keeps pushing us because none of us is entirely victim, entirely perpetrator. None of us is entirely child or entirely adult. None of us, you know, we're moving through it. None of us is entirely safe or entirely unsafe. And that's what feels so powerful about this to me. So to speak, I want to just take the risk of speaking to Tomas, who we've never met in person, but I sort of feel like I never want to disagree with you. I so appreciate your comments in every week in Open Book. But when I read that text, which is so disturbing, that Rashi about the father who responds to the ungrateful child, essentially, by saying, well, you want to see what it feels like to be unprotected? I'll show you what it feels like to be unprotected. So I recognize that in myself, right? I recognize in myself the anger at sort of my efforts to protect being unappreciated, or, I think back to even when I'm looking at my husband here, when our children were little, very little, and we would see in ourselves sort of sometimes it would feel like the baby was totally in control, like ruling our life, either letting us sleep or not. And I don't mean to trivialize, we are on these different planes, but anyway, there were moments of feeling as parents like victims being ruled by, the will of the baby. And then we would say, that's insane, right? This is like a vulnerable infant, but those are both in us. So anyway, and the other thing that feels like they're both in us is the inclination to respond to vulnerability with deep compassion, like the way that vulnerability can awaken our compassion, and the way that for all of us also vulnerability can awaken our desire to run in the other direction. And,
or cruelty.
Or cruelty, right? All of that.
Vulnerability due to human beings, right?
Right.
There's something about it that's absolutely terrifying.
Yeah. So I just feel like we cannot, the text is not, the Torah doesn't let us walk away from all of that complexity and just say, no, there's that kind of evil, and then there's this, and they're completely separate. And the last thing I want to say is that your whole message around, the mutual upholding, the way that's Rosenzweig's language, but it's showing up in a variety of these texts. The response to evil with that act of mutual upholding is, yes, one thing it does is it gives those being victimized some agency to respond to evil and try to keep it out. But it's also a response to the Yetzer Hara in us, right? When we do that act of creating that web, of interconnection and interdependence, we're both keeping evil out, and we're also responding to the evil with it, or not evil, but the cruelty within, right? So it's responding to both at the same time. That's all. Sorry. That's a lot.
Yeah. I guess I want to say one more thing, that Tomas, I feel like when I forget in the world that I'm being held up, I'm more vulnerable to evil. And then I think the parable is trying to get at that, but probably in the wrong way. Like there's a cruelty in the parable, and yet I find some truth in it.
I still disagree in that it places the burden on the subject of constant remembering.
Yeah.
And I think that's wrong.
I hear that. Okay, it is 9:50. We're gonna go for another 7 minutes. And some people have had their hands up for a while. So I'm going to, I think I said Daniel, Rachel, Bev. And I'm gonna ask people to be as brief as they can. I know that things are very charged at this moment. So Daniel.
Here we go. Good Shabbos. Trying to put into context.
Ooh, we can't hear you so well. I don't know why.
Can you hear me now?
I think so.
Okay. I was reflecting on
Rabbi David's devar from last night about paradox and the notion of multiple identities that contradict themselves and holding mutually contradictory narratives in one place, and how we make our heart big enough to hold both of them. And it seems like the greatest contradiction externally in the world and also internally within us is that evil and psychological trauma and the divine presence all exist in one contradictory kind of place. And it seems like the divine presence juxtaposed with evil is such
Wait,
a
the divine presence, what? Say it again.
that the presence of evil and trauma with the divine presence just seems like such a contradiction. Like, how can they both be there? But maybe the narrative, and that maybe evil is kind of the ultimate place of exile, like Mitzrayim, like the ultimate Mitzrayim. But we know from the narrative that what begins the process of liberation is this listening capacity of the divine. And what if that theme about the Shekhinah is always with us in exile? Maybe that Shekhinah, the divine presence, is with us even in the evil places or trauma places, if we can only open up some space to access that divine presence.
Yeah,
Maybe
okay.
the word evil, Ra, we have to make a Reya, a friend of the evil. There has to be some engagement between evil, trauma, and the divine presence for healing.
Thank you, Daniel. That's very evocative. And I also want to say something, and I forgot to say this in response to Sharon, but also responds to your point, Daniel. It's like, of course, there's a connection between what happens within and what happens without in the world, because when we don't acknowledge that cruelty within, it gets manifested in the world, right? And then it becomes, intergenerational and becomes collectivized, and, whole people undergo trauma and then sort of enacted in the world in some way or another. Okay, all right. Rachel, Bev, Dorit. Did you have your hand up before? You did, okay. What's your name? Peggy. Peggy. Okay.
I'd like to add two personal thoughts to this discussion.
Yeah.
I don't hear much modern discussion of the fact that the colonizers, the huge modern colonizers, such as England, such as Turkey.
I can't hear you, Rachel. Rachel, you're in and out. Your sound's in and out. I heard colonizers, and there's no
I did say colonizers.
Yeah, I heard
the big colonizers, England, Turkey, they set up a ridiculous situation where they had land all over the place. So they could put the Jews in Kenya. I remember that the president of Mexico at some point said that he had some spare land at the bottom of California. Those colonizers, to me, are more evil than either Arabs or Jews fighting. And we don't say enough about, we were put in impossible situations.
I hear that. So there are bigger forces at hand.
Oh, big time.
Now we need to acknowledge
the other thing.
Yeah, Rachel, I have to move on because a lot of people want to talk.
Okay, I'll tell you more later. Thanks for the opportunity.
But I think what you're saying is really important. Like, what can help us hold the contradictory narratives of perhaps, Palestinians and Israelis, and it's like a bigger frame. Yeah, I love that, Rachel. Thank you. Okay, Bev, Dorit, Peggy, and then I'm going to try to rap, which I don't know how to do.
Yeah, Shabbat Shalom. So this is fascinating, this discussion. Thank you, everyone. And I want to be careful about what I'm saying because I'm a trauma psychologist. So I want to be clear that I'm not saying that evil does not exist and I'm not condoning it. And I think it exists in a context and there's ways of understanding like evil acts and what we think of as evil people. And I always think of this phrase, wounded people wound people. And, so it's not just, it's of course the transgenerational transmission as well. But I remember when I was in grad school, one of the most challenging books I had to read included a whole analysis of Hitler and his
But
own.
I missed the sentences before Hitler, and
I
I'm
said that
guessing
one
they
of
were
the most
important.
challenging books I had to read in graduate school had a whole analysis around Hitler and his abuse and what led him, kind of psychodynamically. And I want to be careful because obviously not everybody who experiences abuse grows up to be evil, but that there is a context, like it's very debated in my field, whether there's like sociopathy and psychopathy that's like inborn or whether it's kind of created, and what are the circumstances that can mitigate something that might be inborn. So I'm just, putting
Yeah,
that.
thank you, Bev. I mean, I think that's, really provocative and interesting. And, that sort of takes me to the beginning, like what are the dangers of trying to understand evil? But I want to say that you can try to understand evil without letting someone off the hook. Like understanding and maybe even having compassion has nothing to do with accountability. It reminds me of this article I read in the New York Times about Robert De Niro, and he said, I would play any character because I want to understand human motivation. And then the interviewer said, would you play Trump? And he said, no. But thank you for bringing that up, Betty. It's so